Pythagoras once said, "The relationship between parents and children is a product of nature. The relationship between husband and wife is a product of choice. Therefore, put your soul into your choice." Let us begin there, because in the modern West, we speak endlessly about love, chemistry, compatibility, emotional intelligence. We analyze attachment styles, trauma histories, communication techniques, yet we rarely pause long enough to confront a far more consequential truth. Marriage is not destiny. Marriage is architecture. You do not merely fall into marriage. You design, and that design does not affect only two individuals. It reshapes two family systems. It reorders loyalties. It redefines authority. It restructures the emotional blueprint of the next generation. If you are a parent whose son is about to marry, this is the moment where you must slow down, not to control, not to interfere, but to examine structure. Because the greatest marital fractures do not begin with dramatic betrayal. They begin with decision-making patterns that were always there. We often evaluate surface qualities. Is she kind? Is she articulate? Is she educated? Does she have a stable career? These are not irrelevant, but they are not predictive of long-term relational stability across extended family systems. The decisive variable is this: when relationships become uncomfortable, how does this person choose? Because discomfort is inevitable in family integration. The question is not whether tension will arise. The question is how it will be metabolized. In clinical family systems theory, what many call in-law conflict is rarely spontaneous. It is frequently the reenactment of earlier relational scripts, particularly those formed in the family of origin. Total cutoff from in-laws in most cases is not a sudden event. It is a pattern repetition. This is why in this lecture, we move away from emotional expression and into structure. Not tone, not personality. Structure. We examine 4 domains. 1. Conflict recognition structure. 2. Thresholds for maintaining versus terminating relationships. 3. Narrative patterns regarding parents and authority. 4. The psychological positioning of the spouse. If you do not access these 4 domains, you will never reach the core. You may ask 100 polite questions and learn nothing essential. The following are not attack questions. They are diagnostic prompts. Their function is to reveal cognitive architecture. Let us begin with conflict perception. Ask this: if, despite your best efforts, you find yourself uncomfortable with someone for several years, how do you usually handle that? Listen carefully to the structure of the answer. If the response is, if it's uncomfortable for years, there's no reason to force it. I'd naturally reduce contact. Or, if it doesn't fit, it's better for both people not to see each other. Or, if it doesn't change after years, it won't change. There's no reason to maintain it. These are not immoral statements. They are coherent. But structurally, they indicate a low tolerance threshold for relational endurance. The implicit framework is binary. Evaluate, keep, or discard. There is minimal reference to negotiation, incremental repair, third-party mediation, or long-term recalibration. Next question. If you feel wronged and the other person does not apologize, how long could you maintain that relationship? Warning indicators include: if there's no apology, it's meaningless. If I'm not respected, there's no reason to continue. This suggests that relational continuity is contingent upon explicit validation. The capacity to maintain connection while holding unresolved tension is limited. Now the recovery question. Have you ever experienced a relationship that was hurt deeply, but later restored? What made that restoration possible? Observe patterns such as, once I'm hurt, it never really goes back. I just distance myself. It only works if the other person completely changes. It wasn't really restored. I just lowered my expectations. Notice the structural markers. Restoration experience absent. Repair dependent entirely on the other party's transformation. Minimal mention of dialogue, patience, shared responsibility. Emotional numbing mistaken for reconciliation. This reveals something critical. For this relational type, relationships are not adjustable systems. They are evaluative contracts. If the cost exceeds the benefit, termination is rational. Again, this is not villainy. It is a worldview. But when this worldview enters marriage, particularly in cultures where extended family integration still matters, it often produces total cutoff dynamics. Now we move to authority and family of origin narratives. Ask, when you've had major disagreements with your parents or older family members, how is that relationship now? If the answer is, we barely talk, there's no need to stress myself. Or, restoration is described as possible only when the elder fully concedes and transforms. You are observing a relational template. Family systems research consistently shows that unresolved cutoff in one generation predicts replication in the next. Some studies estimate that in cases of severe in-law estrangement, over 70–80% involve prior family of origin cutoff patterns. Finally, boundary cognition. Ask, people talk a lot about setting boundaries. What does crossing a boundary mean to you? If the definition equates discomfort with violation. If I feel uncomfortable, that's crossing the line. If I don't feel respected, that's crossing the line. Then the boundary threshold may be subjectively elastic and highly affect-driven. Healthy boundaries protect dignity, but hyper-reactive boundaries protect ego fragility. And the difference determines whether marriage becomes integration or isolation. Let me be clear. This discussion is not about condemning a future daughter-in-law. It is not about suspicion or control. It is about structural discernment, because marriage is not merely romance. It is system fusion. And if you do not examine the invisible architecture before the wedding, you will be forced to live inside it afterward. Pythagoras told us to put our soul into our choice. To put your soul into a choice means you investigate beyond charm, beyond credentials, beyond surface compatibility. You investigate how this person conceptualizes conflict, how they metabolize disappointment, how they narrate authority, how they define repair, because the future of two families may depend less on love and more on structure. If this perspective has been useful to you, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. For parents preparing for a child's marriage, these structural insights may prove more valuable than any wedding planning checklist. Now, with that foundation established, we can move deeper into the next principle. In the previous section, we concluded with a crucial distinction. Healthy boundaries protect dignity, but hyper-reactive boundaries protect ego fragility. Now we must go deeper, because in contemporary Western culture, the language of boundaries has become almost sacred. Therapy culture, self-help literature, trauma, discourse, all have rightly emphasized autonomy and psychological safety. But every powerful idea, once popularized, risks distortion. So here is the diagnostic question. When people talk about setting boundaries today, what does crossing a boundary mean to you personally? Listen carefully, not to the content alone, but to the cognitive structure beneath it. If the answer is, if I feel uncomfortable, that already means the line has been crossed. There's no need to analyze why. Or, any word or attitude that feels disrespectful is crossing the line. That doesn't require explanation. Or, if I took it badly, then it crossed the line. Intent doesn't matter. Or even, my standards are very clear. If something causes me stress, that's crossing the line. What do these responses share? They locate the boundary entirely inside subjective feeling. Discomfort equals violation. Emotion equals verdict. In such a structure, intention is irrelevant. Context is secondary. Miscommunication becomes moral transgression. This does not necessarily indicate cruelty, but it does indicate fragility in relational elasticity. In a marriage that integrates extended family, elasticity matters. Another variation might be, crossing the line means interfering in my life or evaluating me. Or, if I even have to say that crossed a line, the relationship is already unhealthy. Or, Whether something crossed the line is for me to decide. It's not up for debate. Again, notice the pattern boundaries are unilateral, non-negotiable, and insulated from dialogue. Healthy boundaries allow conversation. Rigid boundaries terminate conversation. Now we move to a deeper diagnostic layer. Here is where superficial questioning fails. Individuals with high social intelligence rarely reveal relational rigidity in general conversation. In fact, they often appear exceptionally mature. They fluently use the vocabulary of psychology: respect, autonomy, emotional safety, self-care, healthy detachment. They sound reasonable, thoughtful, modern, which is why general questions rarely expose structural tendencies. What becomes necessary are layered questions, questions that introduce 1. Specific scenarios, 2. Extended time horizons, third-party consequences. This three-step escalation reveals cognitive inflexibility. Let us examine a scenario. If your relationship with your in-laws is not very good, but your husband is deeply distressed by the tension, how many years do you think you could maintain that relationship for his sake? In a flexible relational structure, you might hear, we would adjust as we go. I would try. For his sake. It depends on how things evolve. But high-risk responses sound different. The idea of measuring discomfort in years doesn't make sense. Why should I endure something for years? If it doesn't work, it's better to end it quickly. The idea of enduring already proves it's unhealthy. I wouldn't want to maintain it even for a day. What is embedded here? The equation. Relational endurance, unjust sacrifice. In this framework, the spouse's distress is not integrated as a meaningful variable. The self remains the primary reference point. Now let us intensify the scenario. If your husband were psychologically collapsing between you and his parents, would distance still be necessary? This is a crucial moment. Does the answer incorporate his suffering as a structural factor, or does it maintain emotional absolutism? High-risk answers include, that's something he has to resolve. It's strange for me to be in the middle. I can't change my standards just because he's struggling. That's his issue with his parents. Even then, my feelings come first. Marriage doesn't obligate me to be a mediator. Observe the deeper structure. The spouse becomes a buffer, a shield, an intermediary responsible for absorbing the impact. Outwardly, this appears neutral. He should decide. It's his family. But structurally, it isolates him. He is forced into a binary choice, wife or parents, and that forced binary is one of the most corrosive dynamics in marriage. Now consider another revealing question. When conflict arises with your in-laws, do you prefer addressing it directly or asking your husband to handle it? High-risk patterns sound like this. It's his family. He should deal with it. If I step in, it complicates things. He should choose. I just state my position. The decision is his. It's fair that he manages his side. On the surface, this sounds rational, but psychologically, it transfers burden while preserving innocence. I didn't force anything, he decided, yet he decided under pressure. This is what I call the shield dynamic. The spouse becomes the emotional firewall, absorbing conflict, while the initiator remains structurally untouched. In extended family conflict, this is the most dangerous configuration. Because it does not explode, it erodes. Ancient wisdom captured this long before modern therapy language existed. An Egyptian papyrus once advised, when choosing a wife, look at her mother. A tree with deep roots does not fall in the wind. This was never about lineage pride. It was about relational modeling. How does a person handle disagreement with parents? Do they negotiate? Do they recalibrate? Do they endure discomfort for connection? Or do they delete? Patterns with parents often replicate with in-laws. Not because the in-laws are worse, but because the cognitive template is portable. The so-called cutoff type does not sever ties out of hatred. They sever ties because that is their primary strategy for managing prolonged discomfort. Delete, block, distance. Reframe as self-protection. This is not an emotional flaw. It is a structural habit. And that is why this issue is not about personality, not about kindness, not about charm. It is about relational processing style. If parents fail to recognize this structure before marriage, they often find themselves later asking, "How did it come to this?" But by then, the architecture is already load-bearing. In the next section, we will examine how this cutoff structure evolves into forced choice dynamics inside marriage, how the husband becomes psychologically isolated, how loyalty conflicts intensify, and how the marital bond itself begins to fracture. If this analysis has provided clarity, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. Conversations like this may feel uncomfortable, but they are necessary, especially for families preparing for marriage. In the next episode, we will move from theory to lived case, patterns where structure becomes consequence,